What if you could develop skills to help manage IBS symptoms in only 10 minutes per day? This episode is sponsored by Mahana Therapeutics, which offers the Mahana IBS app. This is a new app that offers evidence-based cognitive behavioral therapy to reduce the severity of IBS symptoms. Until the end of June, this is available at no cost for eligible patients. Get started now and download the app at mahanatx.com/The Gut Show. Welcome back to The Gut Show. I am really excited because in this episode, we actually get to wrap up the season. And this season has been really special and unique because this was the season where I decided to interview other guest experts and voices in the IBS world and not just have myself talk or just my team. And what came out of that were a lot of really incredible conversations. There were a lot of things that opened my eyes to kind of new perspectives, a lot that just made me really excited because it aligned a lot of with what I already do and what I already believe and think. And it was just really nice to be able to put those conversations in your hands. And so today, as we wrap up the season and kind of tie a bow around it, I want to share a little bit more of my story. I'm going to share a little bit more about why I really believe that these types of conversations make such a big difference. And then I also want to talk about how we can continue to spark these conversations and the value that really does come out of them. So my goal with this episode would be to hopefully encourage you to get out and share your story more, to start conversations, to be a part of conversations, because they can make such a big impact, even though they may not seem like it at the time. They may seem small, but in reality, these conversations can do so much, especially for those who are living with IBS or other gut issues and even other health issues and concerns that might be going on. So a little bit more about my history. If you've been following me for a long time on Instagram or even on the podcast, I know I've shared bits and pieces of my story throughout different episodes and seasons, then you may remember that my story with IBS actually starts in childhood. I remember in elementary school, just dealing with chronic gut issues, like lying on the bathroom floor, screaming in pain, going to the emergency room multiple times, having tons of stomach bugs. I think I had 2 to 3 stomach bugs every year. And I really thought that was just normal. But it was something that was just recurrent, something that every time, a flare came up or all of these symptoms were heightened, my parents didn't know what to do. And so eventually we went through rounds of testing. And after a few years, they finally came to the conclusion that it was IBS. And they were able to somehow link it back to a Giardia infection in early childhood. So that's what happened throughout, 2 to 3 years of testing. And I remember in 4th grade, that's kind of when the final testing happened. And that's where I was given that, diagnosis of IBS and then kind of sent on my way. I've tried to, recount some of those memories. And I think some of it has just been kind of blocked out. There's a lot of my childhood I don't remember, which I don't know if I'm 30 years old now. So is that normal? Is it not? I don't know. But what I do know is that I don't remember being given any advice. And I was seeing, great doctors at the Children's Hospital, the main hospital of the state. And I remember I had one therapy appointment because I'd have random, weird accidents and also a lot of constipation. It was very strange. My symptoms were definitely impacting me. And so, I know I was sent to a therapist once at the Children's Hospital. And I barely remember that conversation. I just remember being there, but I don't remember really being given tools. I don't even really remember. I remember suppositories or enemas. I definitely remember that because my mom had to do it. So that was not the most comfortable thing. And I remember that would go through elementary school and I think even some of middle school. But by the time that I recounted a lot of my own memories of getting older in my life, I don't really remember a lot of strategies. I didn't take Miralax. I didn't take fiber supplements. I remember I got some fiber Metamucil cookies or something at the time, potentially. I remember how terrible they tasted, so I didn't keep doing those. But I don't even remember being told to drink more water or anything. And I was really active because I was playing sports, as a cheerleader. I was really involved. And, even with extra movement, maybe that's what helped, going into middle school and being part of the sports. Maybe that's what helped a little bit, but I didn't have tools. And so becoming a woman, if you will, going through puberty, going through those awkward middle school years, kind of learning who I was and, going through navigating friendships and relationships, like dating and back then, moving into high school, deciding what I wanted to do with my life, like all of these different things in my memories. While those were really exciting, they were also kind of clouded by this level of insecurity that I had because of the symptoms that I dealt with. I remember I dealt with constipation, chronic constipation, and definitely IBS-C at the time. And the pain is what we kind of come and go. Like the pain definitely lessened after like my elementary school years, but it was still there in the worst points of my constipation. So if I had trapped gas or if I was very constipated, then the pain would definitely come. But I kind of learned how to deal with it. But I still remember the insecurity, right? Of, well, I would go to church camp in the summer for a week. It's like, well, by the end of the week, I knew I was going to be in pain and be miserable. But like I could not use a public restroom, right? It's like, there's no way I'd be able to use the restroom. And so I remember I would go into that knowing that like, this is going to be terrible. Like I can't use the bathroom. I remember I would go on trips, and I talked about this recently, I think on one episode or some conversation somewhere, but so I remember a trip in middle school, and we went to the like theme park that's like an hour away. And I remember, most trips like that, who knew, like you never knew what was going to happen for my body. But if I dealt with a lot of gas production and I dealt with trapped gas, it would be so painful to the point where my typical go-to was to go back to the car, back to the bus, wherever I could go to lay down. Because if I could lay down for a bit, and especially like on my stomach, and that's still my go-to, if I could lay on my stomach, I knew that I'd be able to pass the gas, especially if I was alone and more comfortable. I could pass it. And if I could pass it, the pain was gone. And so, I remember one trip, we were at this theme park, and I wasn't able to go back to the vehicle. But what I was able to do was go to the nursing station because I was in such severe pain that I was like, I can't push through this. I'm extremely uncomfortable. So I went to the nursing station and laying on the table, like there's other people there. So I remember thinking like, I can't pass this gas. So like I was so insecure about it. Like, if it smells, like it's embarrassing, if I'm ashamed, all of those things were coming up. So I was, like 12, 13, 14, whatever, however old I was. I wasn't even 16. It was definitely before that. And so I'm laying there, and, I talked to the nurse and everything, and she knew what was going on. Well, then my friends came in, or friends that were with me, and they were like, oh, are you okay? Checking on me, trying to be kind. And I remember the nurse telling them that, it's just trapped gas. Like, oh, so I kind of made a joke about it. And I just remember feeling like just crushed, right? Of like so embarrassed. And yes, there's nothing to be embarrassed about, and I definitely say that now, like there's nothing to be embarrassed about, but also as a kid, like that's a lot to deal with. And I was so embarrassed and so insecure. And I remember those were the types of feelings that I would have. And, anywhere I went, that's what I feared the most. And so sometimes that would look like kind of maybe restricting intake a little bit. I honestly, how I grew up in a very small rural town in South Arkansas. I was never really taught much about foods. Like I really didn't know. I didn't really understand even what was healthy or not necessarily healthy. I didn't know like what caused gas. Like no one told me, right? I didn't know that until I became like trained to be a dietitian. I knew nothing. Like, and I didn't really eat a lot of vegetables or anything, but, I remember, I would kind of tiptoe around things, or I just was so cautious and scared of just having that pain and being, outed. And what that ended up turning into in like future times, and I've talked about this on Instagram before, is I would go find any opportunity I could to pass gas if I dealt with that pain. And so dirty bathroom floors. And I have a quote on Instagram that says, if you've never had to lay down on a dirty bathroom floor to pass gas, like you don't get it, right? Like you don't understand. And while you don't have to have that same experience, I think we all have those types of experiences. It's like, I would rather lay on a dirty bathroom floor than tell the person in front of me, like, hey, I've trapped gas. I'm going to lay down on the floor here and pass it. it might smell bad and like, it's going to be embarrassing, but that's what I need to do. Like, I couldn't do that as a kid. And even now as an adult, like I could only do that around my husband, like just not in my personality. I'm not that open. And so, those are some of the things I experienced. So going into college, like this wasn't resolved. Like it improved a little bit through high school as well. Like, I did drink more water because I was exercising more. I got more serious about, softball and, ran track and stuff like that. I was not like a big athlete, but I definitely was active and, was practicing every day and, was really serious about even the cheerleading and just like more kind of competitive and just with my group of friends. So, in high school, I definitely had better control. And so those flares were more far between. But even with that, I remember I would not like, I feared like being gone. Like everyone came to my house for things because I was more comfortable at my house. If I didn't go to the bathroom at my house, like I'm not going to the bathroom in public. Like if I played a softball game and like I knew I was in pain, like I would just have to push through it. And I kind of learned how to play to the best of my ability in severe abdominal pain. Because I learned that like while it hurt so bad, and it definitely did, I could still do things. It was like the mental game. And I think even today, I went through a lot in my childhood, and I talked about that more, and we can talk about that another day. But I developed a lot of mental toughness that I'd still take with me that I'm kind of grateful for, because it has helped me like really have mental toughness is really the best way I can explain it. But I would take that into high school of like, okay, I just need to push through. Like I can do this. Like, I knew what the problem was and like it wasn't going to resolve until I just got home. So I just knew I had to push through it. And so going to college, having to live in a dorm room, I was terrified, like more terrified of having to share a public restroom on my dorm floor. It's just like our floor and the bathrooms were in the center. And we were technically a co-ed dorm. It was like female floor, male floor, female floor, male floor, which also terrifies. There was like guys walking around all the time. Probably good for me to like learn how to not be so embarrassed. But that was the situation I was about to move into. And so here's me terrified of public restrooms, knowing that I deal with this constipation issue. And like, I honestly thought going into college, like I'm never going to poop. Like, I didn't at the time know what could happen if you don't and like what happens with impaction. It's probably a good thing because I would have been more anxious and fearful, and maybe would have held me back a bit. But I did not know that, thankfully. But I went into college like terrified. And when I tell you that I became a morning person to go to the bathroom first, like I did, I would seek out, like I didn't need to know where all the bathrooms were because I didn't deal with diarrhea. So I didn't have to do that. What I did know though is where the private single bathrooms were, because I knew like in the library on the second floor, I could go to that bathroom and it was like one stall. So I could lay on the floor, pass my gas, have a poop if I needed to. Like it was private. And Friday nights, like I always laugh, my entire dorm floor. I went to the University of Arkansas. It's very Greek, lots of sororities and fraternities. That wasn't me at all. Wasn't drawn to that even in the slightest. Like I'm not super social. And it wasn't interesting. So all my floor though, they were all in sororities. And so every Friday night, everybody went out and I did not. I did laundry. And that was whenever I had the bathroom to myself. And then Saturday morning, like I saw like naked girls on the bathroom floor, like a lot of stuff from the aftermath of the Friday night. But it was okay because it was like if someone was in there, they were likely kind of passed out or not fully coherent. And so I was able to use the bathroom. And like to me, that was like a sense of relief. So fast forward a couple of years, that was how it really impacted me. And I had my first big flare in college where I actually had diarrhea for 2 days. I still don't know, like, was it like food poisoning? Like, I really don't know like what caused it. Maybe it was because it was pretty bad. It was 2 days straight of just diarrhea. And that was not me. And I dealt with, at that point, almost 15 years. Yeah. Almost 15 years of constipation with, stomach viruses as a child, but I had diarrhea for days. It wasn't resolving. So I went to the campus doctor and I was like, something's wrong with me. And then, they were like, yeah, nothing's wrong. You're fine. And finally I was like, well, I do have this history of IBS. And I was also going through a lot of stress at that time because I was pre-med and realized that like I'm a pretty self-aware person, and realized based on some of the classes, I did not care about them at all. And I refused to study. Like I just couldn't do it. So it's like, I don't care about this. I don't want to do this. Like calculus. I somehow made it through 2 forms of calculus and passed, but it was not good. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to make it to medical school. Like I don't have it cut out in me to like do these things. I don't care about it. Today's episode is sponsored by Mahana Therapeutics. Did you know that cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is an evidence-based option for IBS management? A clinical trial showed that nearly 2 out of 3 patients treated with Mahana IBS reported an improvement in IBS symptom severity. The best part is that this is an easy-to-use app you can do in just 10 minutes per day from the comfort of your phone. Mahana IBS gives you the tools to self-manage symptoms and develop the strategies to live a fuller life with IBS. And until the end of June, Mahana IBS is available at no cost for eligible patients. Get started now and download the app at mahanatx.com/The Gut Show. You can also find this link in show notes. Let's get back to today's episode. And so I was at kind of a crisis point of, I'm in my sophomore year and I need to make a new decision. And so all of that was also happening around this time. So maybe that was my IBS flare. But I, went to the doctor. There was a conversation and I mentioned like, oh yeah, I remember whenever I was a kid, I got diagnosed with IBS and I've dealt with, constipations and issues throughout my life. And the doctor, I remember it so clearly. She was, writing on a notebook and she just put her pen down and looked at me and she's like, oh, well, that's what it is. It's a flare. Like it's just your IBS. And I remember feeling, and now it's like, yeah, that might've been, it probably was, but because I'd never gotten any help and because I hear this from my clients all the time and try to have as much empathy as I can, because I get it. But like, I just remember feeling like, really? Like, is that a cop out? Like, is that really all that's going on? Because I thought IBS was such a small thing, right? Because, oh, that's just what I was told. And I went from seeing the doctor all the time to not seeing the doctor anymore. And so it just felt like, okay, it's nothing. And now I'm being told that like, well, now my experience is just this. Is there something wrong with me? Like, I don't know. Like, is that something I should be serious about? So that happened. Quite soon after that, I discovered dietetics, not because of my gut. I actually did not get into diet to be a dietitian because of that, but I did become a dietitian. And so while I was studying nutrition, that was the first time, one, I learned about food and about why water is important and even just the basics of nutrition, and it was just mind blowing to me. But I also learned about IBS because we had, a year worth of what we call medical nutrition therapy. We learn about different conditions and the recommendations that we make for those, on top of like our biology and metabolism and all these kind of deeper level science classes that then fed into the medical nutrition therapy side. So I'd already learned about digestion and the digestive tract. And I learned about, how everything worked together and, metabolism, which means how we break down nutrients. And so I learned more about fiber and how it was fermented and, broken down. Had learned about the gut microbiome because the big like microbiome project happened around that time. So I was learning all these things. And then I learned about IBS, and it was probably 15 minutes worth of the lecture that day on all GI conditions. But whenever I heard my teacher talk about IBS, it was one of those moments like someone may be feeling, I know I'm streaming this right now and someone said, I feel so heard. I was that way where I was like, wait, what? And I was front row student, sitting on the front row, taking my notes, like fully engaged. Like that's the kind of student I was. And I was just like, wait, what? Like there's things you can do. Like this is an actual thing. Like there are solutions. Like I've never heard anyone talk about this. And looking back now, it's so ridiculous that half of my floor probably had IBS, right? We know that it's so common among women, especially women in college. Like that's where flares tend to happen. That's where, the biggest triggers really come out. And, the people in my class, even dietetics is a primarily female field, which hopefully will change in the future. We need some more diversity there. But my class was mostly women. And so I'm sitting there like, well, now like 25% of those people probably had IBS. And here I am in this class hearing this 15-minute part of a lecture, completely like mind blown. because what I had been told I had for over 15 years, now I'm finally hearing about what it even is and that there are solutions. And so, I went on, to, okay, everything I heard, like take action on it, like let's experiment, let's go dig in, which led me down the Google rabbit hole that many of us go on. And yes, I had some pretty credible sources at that time, but it was still very misguided, right? I didn't have guidance from someone else who understood. I was just figuring it out. And so that spiraled into disordered eating habits, lots of disordered behaviors. Also, had struggled with my weight and just like insecurity there, body dysmorphia, that fed into my shame, like dealing with bloat and constipation. Like that was something I was always insecure about growing up and still can be sometimes, right? Where it's like my midsection is what bothers me. And like, looking in the mirror, like that can be really hard. And that was really triggering for me. And so I was navigating that. And then these recommendations that aren't the best because they're just science recommendations. And, what's on paper sometimes doesn't always take into account the real person in front of you. And I've learned that as a practitioner, but reading a book that doesn't always take into account what you might be dealing with. And so I did it all the wrong way. I did lots of restriction. I, just went down that hole for almost 5 more years throughout the rest of my school, in my training, into my first job a little bit. And what finally happened is in that journey, I was finding things that worked and I was eating healthier, like moving my body more and all these different habits. And like these behaviors were great and they were really feeding into how I was feeling, but there was so much disordered behaviors with it too. And like nothing was sustainable. It was very popcorn, like try this for a little bit. Okay, let that go. Try this for a little bit. Let it go. Try this for a little bit. Let it go. And like a true dietitian to be, we tend to all do that. And finally, after like training and into my first job, like I finally hit a point where I was like, this is exhausting. And like, I'm done just trying all these things. And what I like to describe it now, like at the time I felt like it was like, whatever, I'm just kind of giving up on, not giving up like I'm going to go do everything differently, but I'm giving up like the striving of like, I gotta figure it out. Let's figure it out. Let's figure it out. I gave up on that. I was like, let's just chill for a moment. And now how I describe it is it's where my knowledge, everything I had learned through school, everything I had learned through research, everything I learned in every talk I went to, because the microbiome stuff was all brand new in science at that time, which makes me feel old. But I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And like, this is a new topic and all this new, I was just so like obsessed with it. And so I took all of that information and I paired it with my intuition of what do I feel? And this is before I was even really exposed to intuitive eating. That probably could have helped me. Those resources, if you remember our podcast episode with Elise Resch, such a great episode and conversation. If I would have had someone like her on my team at that time, like it probably would have been even better. But, I messily, however you want to describe it, just fumbled my way through this knowledge and intuition combination. And what came out of that was the holistic kind of framework that I talk about all the time now. And the reason why I care so much about that, right? The reason why I care so much about knowledge and intuition, knowledge and the person as a real person, and just taking into account how IBS can be so individualized, but IBS can also be, it can like kind of seep into every part of you, right? It's not all just the IBS. Like the fear I had of the bathroom wasn't caused by my IBS, like from a physiological standpoint, but that fear was still very real and had become part of me because my IBS had kind of seeped into the rest of my life, if that makes sense. Which I know some of you do feel that, right? Where it's like, there's all of these different components where like there's more anxiety around things that you wouldn't have been anxious about before. It doesn't take much to kind of set you on edge because you don't know what's going to happen. Like, while IBS isn't the one causing that, it's kind of the trickle effect, right? And so I learned that that was the intuition of like, I know my body and I know that causing more anxiety is not going to get me forward. So how can I take a step without that anxiety? And it's like, it was those little like conversations that finally led me to the full control that I have, where I get asked, now, do I have IBS? Yes. it technically doesn't go away. Like, until we know it does for sure, like it's there. If I get, extremely constipated for some reason, or, it doesn't happen very often, but like if I do have some gas buildup that I'm not able to release, I do still feel that very real, very intense pain. I know what to do about it now, but it's still there. But what I've done is I know what habits to put in place to keep those symptoms at bay while also honoring my intuition and my life, which to me means, my priority is not like keep symptoms to a 0%. It's like if I'm bloated, sometimes, it's like that's why I talk about bloat friendly clothing. So that's where all of that came from. So the reason why I bring all of this up, and the reason why I shared my story, not just to make you feel connected to it, because you might, and that's great, but the real reason I talked about it is because I like to think about that girl from, second to third grade when my symptoms began to the sophomore in college. So that like 15-year period. What would have happened if that girl had heard somebody talk about their experience with IBS, or even really talked about their experiences with constipation? What would have happened in my life, right? Like, what would that have done for me? Because I remember that first conversation in my classroom, which wasn't even a two-sided conversation. It was just me learning, but just hearing about it sparked this sense of hope of like, oh, there's something out there for me. And whenever I decided to start being more confident and share about my life and my experiences, that actually led me to focusing on this for my work, because I was excited about it. And I realized, hey, a lot of people are struggling with this too. I'm qualified to do this, and I'm also passionate about it. And, just went head first into all the research I could to provide better care. But as I began to share, the more people really began to communicate that they were heard, that they had hope, that they had never heard anyone talk about it. And now they feel like they're seen. They're no longer isolated. And so I think about, well, what would I have felt earlier on if I would have heard this conversation? So in opening up this season and bringing in these different experts, and a lot of our conversations have been around, experts sharing about different topics around IBS. And we've had fellow people with IBS, those who've started businesses, those who've created online communities. But what I hope that you get out of this entire season and watching every single episode is, yes, a renewed sense of hope, but I hope that that actually translates to you to take action as well, to start having conversations, because we don't know what we don't know. And when we start conversations, what we do is we build awareness, and we bring awareness and attention to the problems that we've all lived with in some form or fashion. And while my experiences are different than yours, you hearing my experience can still bring you hope. And then what that can do is encourage you to take action to share your experience, which will then trickle to the next person that might actually relate more to your experience than my experience. And so they feel more seen and they feel more heard. But if problems stay in the dark, isolation is going to be more likely. If problems stay in the dark and we feel like, as the IBS community, if we hold on to our shame and our embarrassment, we're not going to get the healthcare that we deserve. We're not going to get the research studies that we are well past due, right? We're not going to get the answers. Like, we're still going to get the problems we see with certain professionals who don't take it seriously. Because if we're ashamed, how are we going to advocate, right? How are we going to come together and be, we just created the IBS Warrior Summit, but like, how are we going to really be that kind of warrior community that stands up together? How are we going to fight back against the negative connotation jokes about IBS? Because some people, that's all they hear. So they're more shamed. They're more embarrassed. They're, think that they're less than because that's what they're being told. How can we change those conversations? Because I really do believe that with community, with vulnerability, hope really does begin to build and change really begins to happen. So that's what I hope that you've gotten out of this season. And if not from the season, at least from this conversation. And, that doesn't mean that you have to start a podcast. Unless that's your thing, you should. It doesn't mean you have to share on Instagram and be around social media bullies. It doesn't mean that you have to do that. What it could mean is that you talk to your friends, that you speak up and ask questions and, see what people are going through so that you are there to share if someone is feeling more isolated. If you notice someone is canceling plans or you see those signs in someone else, like start a conversation because it can mean so much. Start a blog, write anonymously, join groups, find a way to really share and encourage because it makes a huge difference. So thank you for joining in for this season. Season 4 will be coming soon. We've already got it planned. So take a little summer break and then we'll come back and bring you lots of content throughout the rest of the year. But I'm so proud of what we've created. And if that has been valuable to you in any way, it would be an honor if you would share your feedback through a review. Just go to our channel, leave a review, and share, maybe one thing you took away from it, something that you enjoy about it. And then if possible as well, share it with a friend so that we can continue sharing these conversations and making an even greater impact.